5 pull-ups, let alone 5 sets of 20 pull-ups. They said, let me know how many sets it takes you. It took me somewhere in the mid-30s of sets. And there were tears there, right? I was like, maybe I'm not as strong as I thought I was. Well, you fast forward, I went from 168 pounds to 191 pounds in 3 months. And by the end of those 3 months in that summer, I was doing 100 pull-ups in 3 sets. And I'm not saying that to puff my chest. I'm saying that because I lived it, right? And I think like when you start to experience something like that, then it starts to ingrain in you. It's almost tattooed on your soul kind of thing. So I've seen it from that physical adaptation in my life. But then once I saw it, I was like, whoa, maybe I can do that mentally too. And that's where the mindfulness and the awareness and the visualization comes from, because now I feel like I can snap to and get into my visualization state, which I couldn't do years ago. So there's these ideas that, to me, if you can really build upon and build upon and build upon, momentum will take over your life. And the last little nugget I'll say about momentum is momentum doesn't care, which is probably the coolest thing about it, but also the saddest thing about it. You hang out with a bad person, it could become a toxic relationship and ruin your life, right? You hang out with a good person, it could become a great relationship, and that can really take you to places you never even thought, right? So whatever realm you want to talk about, momentum, it exists, right? That's why, once you set your intention on something, now it has your attention, right? Once it has your attention, then it leads to your decision-making. Once it becomes your decision-making, it leads to your behavior. And that is just a continuous cycle every single day. And whatever realm you want to talk about, whether it's socially with the relationships, whether it's with your soul set and your spirit, whether it's your mindset and your psychological framework, or your health set, like I was talking about with that personal story, it really is that building block, right? Rome wasn't built in a day type of cliche thing. It's a true thing. Right. And I like to use that example of me because it's ingrained in me now. I don't know any other way. And when I can live it now I can talk about it with that certain authenticity that I can push somebody. And even those days where it doesn't feel like an uptick, if you zoom in, it's the smallest little uptick in their holistic approach. And momentum is the most powerful thing. I'll echo that from the rooftops.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon.
Go ahead, John. I was just going to say, so is that something, Mark, that because I know it's easy or easier to see those physical adaptations of momentum, right? But what about on the mental side? Do you find that to be a challenge with your clients to talk to them about the neuroelasticity and all that type of stuff that we don't always get to see? We may feel it, but we sometimes don't even know what we're feeling, right?
100%. And you're absolutely right, because, there's not that one-to-one tangible, right? I got this from Dr. Nick Molinaro, another one of my mentors, works with a lot of pro golfers. He talks about this psychological study that kind of makes it a little bit more real. And then the next step that you have to do is add exercises, videos, group kind of tasks to show how, wow, if we can add to this, if we can keep going with this, it might become something special. And you see that every year in any sport, like a culture that evolves, right? Which team usually wins? It's the one that peaks at the right time. There comes that timing again. But going back to that psychological research that I was talking about, is there was this group of 7th graders broken up into 3 groups. One was told 3 times a week for 20 minutes, you're going to do bicep curls, right? Next group was told no training whatsoever for the next 3 weeks. The third and final group was told for 20 minutes, 3 times a week, we want you to close your eyes and visualize yourself doing bicep curls of weight that you could not hold in your hands, right? It's that heavy. 3 weeks later, they come back and they see that physical group had an average gain in their bicep curl of 5 to 7 pounds. Those that were doing no training, 0 and 0, didn't have any improvement. But those that did the mental training, they didn't even touch a single weight, average gain in 3 to 5 pounds in their bicep curl. What does that mean, right? And then I could take that a step further and say, once you start going into that realm of, physical rehabilitation, Dr. Nick talks about if he takes them through visualization techniques, and you see me closing my eyes even as I say that word, is because if you start visualizing while you're in physical rehabilitation and you can't say your arm is locked because you just got surgery, there will be blood flow that goes there. And he has another story in which he helped a guy who got Tommy John surgery. He was at the 6-week mark where he should have been at the 3-week mark after surgery, just from that blood flow through neuroplasticity and what you're talking about. And I think what I brought up in the introduction of mind, body, spirit, you also have to throw the brain in there too, right? Because anything that we think about all the time, and if I told you to think about how's your left foot doing right now you're activated to think about your left foot. And if you wanted to add a couple pumps, now blood flow is definitely going there on top of the thought about going there, right? So the addition, it's like this wave of blood flow that's going there that can make it healthier, that can make it grow that muscle. And I think it's not enough, of course, to sit here and do positive thinking and imagery and visualization. But what if you visualize the bicep curl while actually doing it? Now you're going to have that combined kind of waves crashing into each other, and you reach a height you never thought you could, right? And it's okay if you don't believe that, right? Anybody who might be listening to this, but try going up against somebody who does, right? I always say that, you might think that this is hard, right? You might think this is hard, but go up against somebody who does, and then tell me how it goes in the 9th inning or the 4th quarter. Tell me how it goes, right? And it's usually a much tougher scenario. And that's where it becomes tangible, Brandon. That's where it becomes tangible, because everybody wants to win on Saturday. Not everybody wants to work on Wednesday. It's the same thing when it comes to physical training versus mental training.
Well, I think it also goes into, from the book Compound Effect is, that idea of a little, a lot versus a lot, a little, right? I mean, it's just making sure that you have the discipline to maintain that type of a focus every day. It's kind of energy, right? I mean, it's that whole thing I've heard you use this example of the candle and the wildfire, so to speak, and how that, will you share that with the listeners as well?
Sure. I think it's important to understand the same thing that blows out a candle extends a wildfire, right? And what are you doing to build up that internal pile of logs or sticks or whatever you want to call it? If you can build that up, right, internally, because the most important relationship we have is the one with ourselves. Right. So if you start doing that uncomfortable inner work, and it is uncomfortable, or else every single person would do it and every single person would be elite. And I think if you start to build yourself up and stack those logs on top, then when the time comes, that adversity really is the point of the story. When that adversity comes, you're not getting blown out like a candle. You're allowing that to add to your fuel. And I hear it all the time, right? Especially this is kind of one of those nods to Kobe Bryant. He would build that narrative in his mind, right? He would build that narrative. Even if you didn't say something nasty, he almost made it up, right? Because if you can build that narrative and you can extend your wildfire, and then you're a tough person to beat, right? You're a tough person when it comes to competition. So that's a great story right there about when adversity comes, and it comes all the time in all different forms. Are you going to be ready for it? To extend your wildfire.
Yeah, it's funny. So our guest last week was a gentleman by the name of Brian Kite from Daily Discipline. And Brian talked about this idea of fire consuming obstacles. Fire, when you get it to that state you just talked about, it feeds off of those things. It just gets bigger and bigger as it takes every single obstacle in its way and just consumes it. It actually makes that fire even bigger. So if you can, as the Stoics like to say, prepare yourself for that adversity and get yourself to a point where you invite the challenge, right? You all of a sudden now it's like, okay, that's fine. I've prepared for this. I've used visualization. I say all the time to the athletes I work with is if I asked you to just practice imagery, practice visualization, a lot of times they're always going to be thinking about hitting the ball over the fence, all the positive things. But so often they need to prepare for, especially like a game of baseball, 7 out of 10 times as a hitter, you're going to fail. So why are you spending so much time visualizing all these great things happening? You need to start at least introducing the idea of how you're going to respond to that adversity when you have it.
100%. What the thought you provoked in my mind was I was just listening to The Alchemist on Audible because it was a tough read, but it was easier for me to pick up. And there was 3 lines really, and I want to share 2 that really were provoked. Was that were kind of omnipotent. They kept coming up throughout the entire book, and one of them was, when you want something bad enough, the whole world conspires to help you achieve it. That's that law of attraction. Thoughts become things. But going on the thread that you gave us in terms of fire consuming all obstacles is throughout that book, it says sometimes there's no way to hold back a river, right? And maybe that goes right hand in hand with the momentum that I was talking about, or candle versus wildfire. And it's really this idea that if you build yourself up enough, that it's much better to be prepared for an opportunity that's not there than not be prepared and have the opportunity arise for itself. So you want to make sure that you're that river, right? Because I always try to get myself in that mind frame, whether it's through metaphor, whether it's waking up and asking the question, who needs me today, right? Who needs me today, right? Because we'll go further if it's for others. So there's all these things you can do to activate yourself. And I'll bring in Zig Ziglar, and I always love to do this. Zig Ziglar used to say, we need inspiration and motivation as much as we need a shower. And if we don't have that, it'll lead to stinking thinking. And so I think this is important that we continue to talk about it, to think about it, and then bring the action-provoking side of it, because sometimes there's no way to hold back a river. And yeah, you're right. The fire definitely swallows those obstacles if you build yourself up enough.
So who's your inspiration right now?
Well, I think there's a couple guiding lights that remain those inspirations, right? And I remember talking to Brian Kane about this, and I showed up or signed up for the Pat Tillman run in New York City, because he's somebody who's dead, but I really resonate with in terms of the way he lived his life with full passion. You know, my mother and father, in a lot of ways, gave me that unconditional love that makes me want to give more love to other people. I have an undying, caring sister as well. But I think in terms of those rocks in my life, those really drive me to make them proud. And then I kind of build that narrative, right? Positive or negative, right? And then the last thing I would say is I have a lot of heroes on my team, right? Like the people that I've chosen to follow in a locker room. I want to not only lead side by side, I want to make them proud because they gave back to me, they paid it forward, and now it's my turn to pay it forward as well. And it comes back to that idea that nobody is going to force you towards greatness. Nobody is, right? So this brain, this thing that we have between our ears, is here for one reason, right? To survive and reproduce, right? What we're talking about on this podcast is the furthest thing from that. We're talking about striving. We're talking about thriving. We're talking about taking those 80% negative thoughts out of the 60 to 80,000 that we have a day and smashing them, right? Smashing them. And, you know, the term is ants. You know, we have automatic negative thoughts. Smash those ants. How are you going to smash them? Who's coming with you, right? And to answer your question, I know I'm going a little tangential here, but it's a whole cast of people, right? It's a lot of relationships that I choose to follow. You know, Dr. Rob Gilbert is great in the applied psychology, and he's been a huge guiding light in the field that I'm in. And then I just spent a week of immersing myself in San Diego, learning from Dr. Christina Versari, who was the former head sports psychologist of the NBA. Awesome. So I think it's a lot about seeking out those people. And a lot of those people, by the way, when I first asked them, can I come do this? Can I do that? It was, I was either ignored or I was like, no, what do you want from me? But I just kept showing up. And that's more than half the battle, is that kind of insatiable curiosity that I talked about really early on. Is you're going to get a lot of no's, right? So if you're coming from that framework, okay, I'm going to get a lot of no's. So now what? Let's go through the woods no matter what it takes. And who am I bringing with me?
Well, and you've allowed yourself to be uncomfortable and realize that, hey, no can be uncomfortable, but to still be able to have that perspective, like you said, going into it, that says, hey, I'm okay with that. I'm going to keep showing up day after day. And there's a lot to be said for being able to build off that uncomfortability. Easy for me to say. Right. But I mean, there's some, there's a lot there to build from.
And you're absolutely right. And the term that comes to mind, or the phrase that comes to mind, is everywhere you go, there you are. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have the yes, no. Right. But you got to become comfortable with that number one relationship in your life, which is yourself. Right. There's this story I love about Dr. Gilbert was flying into Scottsdale, Arizona. Right. And the woman next to him on every single turbulence, and of course it was bad turbulence, she was screaming. but screaming, going crazy because she thought the plane was going down. And the 6-year-old behind him was laughing on every turbulence, right? So what's the point there? It's not what's happening around us